All right, it looks like we're live. As we always do, we'll wait for a little bit for people to jump in. Mention in the questions channel if you can hear me, and I will look for that and wait. I'm not seeing any viewers yet, so we will give it just a second for everybody to join. Looks like we've got one viewer. Comment in the questions channel, which should be on archive now. Sorry about that, by the way. I really need to turn the administrative privileges off that let people archive and unarchive channels. Just haven't had the time to do that, even though it probably takes 30 seconds, but cool. It looks like we're live, and we're gonna keep tonight a little bit short as it is a holiday weekend. And then next week, just as a reminder, on Monday, we won't be doing a live stream. But we will be getting into a lot of the nitty-gritty of JavaScript next week. This week is going to be an introduction to JavaScript, and we hope it's kind of an easy introduction into JavaScript. We're not actually going to be writing too terribly much code, but we want you to understand how JavaScript works in kind of a vanilla environment. So how JavaScript interacts with what we call the DOM. And with that, we will get started. So first of all, what is the DOM? The DOM is this thing. Oh, I almost forgot to share my screen. That would have been really bad. Sharing screen, entire screen. All right. So yeah, here. The DOM is basically, it's the document object model. And what that means is, let's say we have a web page, right? Last time we built a page using Bootstrap, and we had all of this HTML, and we put that all in there. And then we had all of this CSS, and we put that all in there. And then eventually we'll have a bunch of JavaScript, and we'll put that one in there. And then your browser, pretty much, it sucks all of that stuff in, and it displays it according to what we call the document object model. So the document object model here, it looks pretty straightforward. It's basically, hey, we have the document itself. The root element is HTML. It has a head and a body. Those elements have children elements that are title. The title has text. Basically, all this means, and you're going to hear it a lot, you're going to hear references to the DOM a lot, is that within your browser and within the way web documents are structured, there are ways that we can influence or manipulate or change these elements on the fly using JavaScript. And that probably doesn't make much sense right now. We're going to show you exactly how that works pretty quick. But just know that when you hear DOM, you can think that just that's how the browser displays things. And when you hear manipulating the DOM or iterating through the DOM or interpolating the DOM, that's just saying, what can we do to change what a viewer sees at the end of the day? So we're going to jump into JavaScript to get started. So it's going to be kind of a rapid introduction to a few things, but it should make a lot of sense. So here I have my desktop. And my desktop is completely empty except for a folder that's called project. And the project has this index.html folder in it. So let's go ahead and open that up. Here's our index.html folder. Nothing here should feel new whatsoever. We've got our HTML declaration that's closed down here. We've got our body that's closed down here. We have an H1 that says about me. We have a list that has some list items. So you can probably imagine exactly what this looks like. It's a blank white page, has an H1 about me, a bullet list with nicknames, favorites, and hometown, and there's nothing in there yet. Just so we can show you what that looks like, we will go ahead and open it up. So again, we're opening project, index.html. There it is, exactly like we would have imagined it. And today, what we're going to be doing, not because this is what we're always going to be doing, but just because I want everybody to understand that this is possible, is we're going to be editing what this page looks like, how it acts, what content it contains, only using JavaScript. So I know that we learned how to write CSS, and that's really important, and you're never going to forget CSS, but we're only going to use JavaScript for today and for this exercise and for the homework that you will be having. So first thing we need to know how to do is how to link to a JavaScript file. Generally, this is done toward the bottom of the body just because JavaScript loads and JavaScript can take a while to run. And if your JavaScript is up here, sometimes the browser will just run top to bottom. And if there's a bug in your JavaScript, then it won't even get to displaying some of the stuff down here. So just to be extra sure, we drop it in toward the bottom of the body. And while we're there, let's look at a couple questions. Should I be using Bash on a Mac, or is Xcode or Terminal okay? Your Terminal on Mac will be similar enough to Bash that you shouldn't even know a difference. Xcode is something that you probably shouldn't be using for web development. That's, in theory you could, but really just stick to a text editor and a terminal program. I use iTerm2. The default terminal will work just fine, and people are sharing links to the Bash shell for Windows 10, which works. If you're on Windows, you can also learn how to use the Windows version of terminal. It just has a few different commands that you'll have to translate. But we're not even going to talk about the terminal too much today, so don't worry too much about that. So here we are. We've got this page. And the way we link to a JavaScript page is really simple. We just say script, src stands for source, equals, and we're just going to call this right now script.js. The JS, of course, stands for JavaScript. And again, we can name this whatever we want. We're just going to call it script for now. Go ahead and close that tag. That is not a self-closing tag. And now where is this script.js? Well, it doesn't exist yet, so we have to create it. So I'm going to just script.js, create a new blank file that is called script.js. Right now, there's just some gobbledygook in it. It doesn't matter. And let's see if that's working. And the way we're going to see if that's working is going to be by manipulating the DOM. And you'll see really quickly what that means. So just as a refresher, that's what this page looks like. We don't need that anymore. You got About Me. You've got a few bullet points. Pretty simple. So to start out, we are going to create a new ID. So you've probably been using classes a lot. So class equals whatever. Just the same way, we can create an ID. And you guys should know how to, so now this About Me H1 has the ID of whatever. So whenever we're talking about whatever, we are targeting this right here. And on the browser, this. Actually, let's refresh. And we'll be able to inspect. And wow, that's really small. But it does not want to resize for me. Oh, I need that little guy. So as you can see, we have an H1, has an ID of whatever. If we wanted to write some CSS here, we could say font family and make it sans serif. And as you can see, that changes. We'll uncheck it a few times, look up at the About Me, and you can see what that looks like when we go back and forth. But as we talked about, we're not going to use CSS in this lesson. So how can we do that using JavaScript? And this is going to be our first time using the document object model. So first, let's actually just change the text that's in here. So we have some text that says about me, and we're going to start out in our script.js by typing document, and that is saying, okay, let's start looking at this entire document, .get element by ID, and the D has to be lowercase. So that's saying, all right, let's start by looking at this document, and then we're going to look for a specific ID. And when the ID that we look for is obviously going to be this whatever ID. And we have to put that in parentheses and quotation marks just to be sure. Whoa. Whatever. So now we have found this whatever ID using JavaScript, starting at the document level. And don't worry too much about this if it doesn't make any sense yet. Inner HTML equals, and we can make it whatever we want. Whatever we want. So we can save that here. We can reload it. And as you can see, basically what happened is we have this original HTML, H1 with an ID of whatever, and we said, all right, document, get the element that has the ID of whatever. And so JavaScript knows enough to find this ID, and then we say, and make the inner HTML, so make the stuff in here say whatever we want instead of about me. And that's exactly what happened. So the takeaway from this is that we can manipulate anything on our HTML, anything within our CSS, and it's actually not just defined as HTML and CSS. We can manipulate anything as the browser displays it by using JavaScript. And a lot of you were asking in the past, why do we focus so much on JavaScript in web development? This is exactly why. Every browser understands JavaScript. Every browser knows what this means. And because JavaScript is built directly into every web browser, we can do anything that we want on any web page using JavaScript. JavaScript definitely has flaws as a language. It's sometimes not the prettiest to write, sometimes not the easiest to write, but neither is English, and we're still speaking English despite all of its flaws. It's just become universal and really powerful. So now that we know how to change the inner HTML, let's see if we can do that with something down here. So let's say my nickname is Os, for example. And we can do the same thing, document, get element by ID, and we called that one nickname, inner HTML equals Austin. We're going to make it my full name instead. And we didn't even look at it the first time to see that it said Os, but we'll go ahead and comment that out, and you'll be able to see that with that line commented out, it goes back to Os. So that works for sure. Let me get this loaded up on my other monitor, just one second. Because we're going to go over a lot of different ways that you can manipulate the DOM using JavaScript. And feel free to ask any questions in the questions channel if any of that doesn't make sense. My local community college starts people off on Java. What is the difference between Java and JavaScript? The difference between those two things is they really have almost nothing in common. But when the original people who were building a new language into the Netscape browser, they wanted to figure out how to market it, and they knew that Java was a really popular programming language, so they called it JavaScript so they could piggyback off of the brand name of Java, and they are completely different and not related in any way other than the name. And in retrospect, it was probably kind of a stupid thing to do, and I bet if the people that created it could go back. They would change it, but here we are. So can we use divs instead of IDs in JavaScript? Yes, we can use anything, and we're going to start looking at that right now. So let's say instead of changing the text on a page, let's say we actually wanted to put some text on a page. So we can do document.createElement div. And just because we're good programmers, we're going to end lines and semicolons. So that created a div in theory, but it's not on our page yet. And so to do that, we have to, in fact, let's see how that displays in the DOM. Yeah, it's not even there. So this is basically creating a div, but we haven't added it yet. Then we can say document.body.append child, and we can put something in right here. We can put a name. We're not going to use name. We'll say the div. We'll call it the div. So one way you could write it is by putting this stuff all in here, or we can just declare a variable, and we'll just call it L. And then let's see. Document.createElement, and then we'll do L.inner HTML equals hello world. And then we're going to, so let's go through this again. We created a variable called L. That's just a placeholder. We're saying we're going to put some stuff in a box. And we created this div, and we called it L just to make things simpler. And then we said, let's make the inner HTML of L be hello world, and we can type, as you can imagine, any HTML in here, and then we added it to the bottom of our body. So this is equivalent of saying at the bottom of our body, div p hello world p div. We're not going to do that because we're writing stuff in JavaScript. So let's see if we did that right. Hello world. We have that down at the bottom. So we can not only change HTML, we can add it. And I know that a lot of you are going to ask, how do we remember what all these stuff, what it's all called? How do we know that it's called create element instead of create new thing or append child? There are really good docs on it, so you don't have to memorize it. You just look it up, and we'll give you a page that you can look all of this stuff up at, and it's really simple. Now let's say we think we made a mistake, and we didn't want this to say hello world. Instead, we are going to try to change it. So let's go down here, and we'll say var L2 equals document.query selector div. Then var new L equals document.create element p. Anyway, I'm not going to go through this whole exercise, but just understand that in theory, you can target anything, you can replace anything, you can change the style of anything. In fact, let's do that in just a minute. And pretty much you have entire control over the DOM by using JavaScript. Let's jump into some questions. I'm sure there's a lot of questions happening. To write JavaScript, is it standard to put in document.ready function? That's generally best practice. We haven't gotten to that level yet, but yes, that is correct. To write all the JavaScript, oh, no, I just read that one. Are we missing a semicolon in the JavaScript line 4? Yep, I just added that. That was my mistake. I sometimes get in the habit when I'm doing quick and dirty examples of not adding the semicolon. It does work without the semicolon, but it's definitely best practice to always add a semicolon. So now we're going to jump in here. And just to make things a little more simple so we don't have to jump back and forth, I'm going to copy this stuff over into CodePen, and we're going to play with it there. So here we have about me, nickname. We don't have any JavaScript overriding anything just yet, but we are going to change that. So somebody just asked, how would I change the background of the body? That's a really good question. So just to show how that's done, we're going to Google it. So JavaScript DOM change background color. So apparently it's that simple. You can grab this, drop it in here in your JavaScript. Document.body.style.background color equals red. What if we wanted to, instead of targeting the body, to target the unordered list? Document.ul.style.background color. That doesn't work. We'll go into why that doesn't work later. But just know that that's not necessarily part of the, well, it is part of the DOM, but it's not part of the DOM that we would target in that way. Let's see. How do we change the font style? So let's see, change font family JavaScript DOM. Document.getElementById. So then we're going to get the ID .style.font family. So let's try dropping that JavaScript into this CodePen and see what happens. So we obviously don't have an element that's called myP, but what if we target instead whatever? There we go. As we can see, the font family became impact because I have impact, and if I didn't have impact, it would become charcoal, and I don't think I have charcoal because I don't even know what that is, but regardless, it'll become sans serif. So yeah, we can manipulate anything that we wanted to. Let's say we wanted to remove bullets. Let's say remove list styling JavaScript DOM. That's not what we want. That's not what we want either. This is actually a really good question here. So we're going to jump into that just because. How can I remove a CSS property? The answer is basically you can't, but you can zero it out. So like over here, we had this, this variable that we called L. So looking at this, we can say L.style.whatever and just zero it out. Basically make it go back to being nothing. And real quick, I just want to look at the homework from today. See what you guys are going to have to do. So the first thing is to create an HTML file that is basically exactly what I have here. And then you have to create your own JavaScript link and link your HTML to this JavaScript. I'm going to get rid of that. That we already showed you how to do. That's pretty straightforward. And then there's just a lot of how should you change the background of a child property, change the font style, add some text, pretty straightforward. And then there's going to be some extra credit, which is going to be to iterate through. As a hint, you'll have to use a for loop and say for each list item, do something. And then create a new image element, which is something that we didn't show you how to do, but you know you can add HTML, so that's pretty straightforward. And you should be able to do that. So I know it's a long holiday weekend, and we might just jump into questions and call it a day from that. Can you target classes? Yes. So the way you target a class is basically document.query selector, and then you say some class. So remember the dot from CSS kind of identifies a class. So there are a lot of different ways that you can target things, but let's say we have a class called some class. And then I don't even know what we want to do here. We'll just change the inner HTML, bunch of passes. There we go. We changed. So this looked for, let's find, so query selector, that's what CSS uses. CSS uses queries. So you should remember those. You can also use that for IDs, but we'll stick to classes for now. And we can change the inner HTML, we can change the body, we can change the color, we can change whatever we would like really simply just by using query selectors. When would you know to use CSS versus JavaScript? What scenario causes you to choose one versus the other? Generally speaking, if it's something you can do in CSS, you probably should do it. If you can do it just in plain CSS, the only reason that you should use JavaScript for what we're doing right now is for practice. And it will make sense in future lessons why we're using JavaScript for this stuff, because that will get into jQuery, and then that will help us learn JavaScript. And yeah, you can also use, instead of .query selector, you can say get elements by class name. I can't remember what we called that class, whatever. So you can do this as well. The big thing that I see a lot of people get tripped up on is its elements. So you can't get a single element by class name. You get elements, and you can't get multiple elements by ID. You can only get element. So class name is plural, ID is singular. It's unclear if we have class on Monday. We do not have class on Monday. No class on Monday. Is it better to use either get elements by or query selector? Both is fine. Both are fine. What we're going to learn is that this stuff that we're actually doing today isn't necessarily a way that you would be writing a lot of your apps. It's just something you need to understand as a foundational building block, because if we skipped it and we started overriding the DOM when it came to, say, React or jQuery, you would not understand what's happening. So you have to understand the document object model. We're going to write some JavaScript to change the document object model. And then later on, we're going to get a little bit more advanced as far as that. When or why would you use ID over class? You use ID if there's only one of something. You use class if there's multiple instances of something. And yeah, I know this has been really short, but it's a holiday weekend. So I want you guys to be able to experiment with this and play with this. Next week, we'll get into writing harder JavaScript and more JavaScripty JavaScript. This is technically JavaScript, but it's really just writing a bunch of stuff with dots and some quotations. It's kind of like, I don't know, wrapping HTML weirdly into JavaScript. One thing that I think is cool is we talked about how we really are just writing HTML in here. So we could even, we can include style tags. We can do whatever we want, and this is just going to be rendered as HTML. But yeah, that's it. We'll keep this one short and sweet. Thanks, guys. We'll be back. We won't be back on Monday. We might add a supplementary optional lecture midway through the week, just to give people more stuff to chew on. If you get really bored with this, look up how to do the same stuff using jQuery. But that will be about it. We'll go over arrays, loops, all that stuff in JavaScript on Friday, so a week from today. And yeah, that's it. Thanks, guys.